So in a last-ditch effort, he asked them if he could read them a letter. So he takes out this letter, and his officers watch it in kind of a confused amazement. I mean, here is their respected commander of 8 years, and it's like, you can't read this letter. Well, what he does is he pulls out these pair of glasses that he has, and he says, and this is what actually prevented the military coup. Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for not only have I grown gray, but I was blind in a service to my country. Okay, so, as you can imagine, there was not a dry eye in that room. And after George Washington left, the officers got together and they agreed unanimously, with just one extension, that they would follow his request and try to solve the problems peacefully. Well, later that year, there was a coalition of businessmen, and many of these would actually attend the future Constitutional Convention. And they were in communication also with other leaders in the Army. And they were considering uniting together again to take the country by force, because they wanted to make the states create a sound financial environment. When England was threatening to succeed, the Articles of Confederation were a dismal failure. Americans were fast approaching anarchy. You can hear the distress in George Washington's quote. This is what he said. I am mortified beyond expression when I view the clouds that have spread over the brightest morn that ever dawned on a country. What a triumph for the advocates of despotism to find that we are incapable of governing ourselves, that systems founded on the basis of equal liberty are merely ideal and fallacious. And this is what Alexander Hamilton said. We may indeed, with propriety, be said to have reached almost that last stage of national humiliation. There is scarcely anything that can wound the pride or degrade the character of an independent nation which we do not experience. So why was the Articles of Confederation such a catastrophe? Well, there's a long list. We're just going to go over a few of them. So as you may recall, the Articles of Confederation, just like the Constitution today, had specific and enumerated powers. But what it didn't have was the power for Congress to enforce their decrees. So it'd be like being a businessman, where you are in control of all your people, except they're going to be paid by somebody else. So instead you find them coming to work when it's convenient for them, or when they decide they want to come to work. Obviously, this kind of a business is just a matter of time before it fails. So Congress did not have the power to raise revenue. They could only request states to comply. And, as we've already noted, the states did not comply. Congress could make treaties, but they could not force the states to obey them. So when they go to these other countries to try to, say, do a trade negotiation, they would just laugh at them. They had the upper hand. Why would they sign a treaty with us? And this, of course, exasperated our economic woes. So Congress could raise troops, but they were completely reliant again upon the states to provide the men and the money. And we already know that we almost lost the Revolutionary War because of this. But did you know that thousands of soldiers died because of this? They died because of lack of equipment, hypothermia, starvation, and disease. So there was no president because there was no executive branch. There was no judicial branch. And a single state could veto any amendment that would try to give the Articles of Confederation more teeth. And that's exactly what they did. So there were many days that there wasn't even a quorum in Congress. Why bother? We can do something about that today. Anyway, Fisher Ames, he was a statesman in Massachusetts, and this is what he said. Who is there that really loves liberty, that will not tremble for its safety if the federal government should be dissolved? Can liberty be safe without government? The period of our physical dissolution is approaching. Anarchy and uncertainty attend our future state. But this we know, that liberty, which is the soul of our existence, once lost, once fled, can never return. The union is essential to our being as a nation. So this time, our founding fathers had wonderful experience on both extremes of the political spectrum, tyranny and anarchy. Now what we needed to do as a country was find that balanced center of the political spectrum. We needed to create a government that gave Congress enough power to do its duties, but not too many powers, of course, to steal our liberties. The problem was such a government did not exist. It didn't exist then, and it did not exist in recorded history. They were literally just going to have to pull their resources together and create it themselves. Now, those who attended the Constitutional Convention were not operating in a vacuum. In colonies, children are taught the fundamentals of reading, writing, and arithmetic. So regardless of whether or not they could go on, afford to go on and further their education, they could become self-taught, which is exactly what many of the founders did, like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. So we know the founders studied the classics, often in their own language. They read Plato's Republic and its laws and Aristotle's essays on politics. They examined the political philosophy of the Greek historian Polybius and Cicero, the great Roman statesman and orator. They knew the legal commentaries by Sir Edward Coke, and they also studied Baron Charles de Montesquieu's Spirit of Laws, John Locke's Essays on Civil Government, Richard Hooker, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, the works of Algernon Sidney and of David Hume. They examined Sir William Blackstone's commentaries on the laws, and of course Adam Smith's free market economy in his book, The Wealth of Nations. And on top of it, they were proficient, completely and totally proficient in biblical, Greek, Roman, American, and European history. And as W. Cleon Skousen wrote in the 5,000-Year League, from all these valuable sources, they sorted out what they considered to be the best and most enduring for the prosperity and peace of a free people under a republican nation. And just as an aside, to the early Americans, republican meant a representative government. Well, for many years, of course, we know that the states refused to call a constitutional convention. But finally, on May 25th, 1787, they did. And George Washington called it a miracle. It lasted 4 long, grueling, and hot months. Many times during the proceedings, the members were in complete despair of it ever coming to fruition. You may recall, of course, the convention was just to adjust the Articles of Confederation. And Rhode Island, they didn't even send any delegates. Only 55 of the 73 delegates could attend, mostly because the states did not fund them. In fact, you'll find individuals like James Madison who had to borrow money just to continue on. And by the end, there was 41 delegates who remained. So the agenda of the convention was set by the Virginia delegates, who put forth the 15 resolves that became the Virginia Plan. We know, of course, that these were authored by James Madison, who was only 36 years old. By midsummer, things weren't going so well. And on July 10th, the delegates of New York, they just got up and left. There was 5 weeks where this convention was in a state of crisis. And George Washington declared, I almost despair of seeing a favorable issue to the proceeding of the convention. Fortunately, by mid-July, one of those thorny issues, representation, was resolved. Up to this point, you had the larger states on one side and the smaller states on the other side. They were irrevocably divided on this issue. It seemed to be this Gordian knot that they could not unravel. They would talk about it and set it aside and talk about it and set it aside. But finally, Roger Sherman, who was also a self-made man, he started life as a cobbler. But through borrowing books from his friends, he became a well-respected lawyer. But anyway, his brainchild is what we now call the Connecticut Compromise. And this ingenious conciliation, of course, is very familiar to us today, where it gave representation to the population in the House, which is what the larger states wanted, and the Senate, they had equal representation. But just like any idea that's new, it took them a while to adjust to this. Well, finally, on September 17, 1787, the Constitution was signed by all the states present except Rhode Island, whom they affectionately called Rhode Island. So there were 3 delegates who chose not to affix their name on this document, mainly because it didn't have a